Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Justin at Saltstrong, and in this video, we're going to take a closer look at the Daiwa Tatula SV TW. There is a lot to talk about in this video. There's a lot of pros and features packed into this reel. We're also going to address a few cons that I think you guys really need to consider before buying this reel if you're interested. And we're going to ask the question, which is, when might you want to use a baitcaster for inshore saltwater fishing? Before we dive into the specs of this Tatula SV TW, I do want to point out there is another newer model that Daiwa made of the Tatula SV TW. It is virtually the same reel in concept. It's a little bit smaller compact body. It's got a shorter handle. It's got a zero adjust spool tension knob. But for us as inshore anglers, I like the fact that Daiwa kept, this is what I'm going to show here on the specs, they kept their two CRBB, or their corrosion-resistant ball bearings, in this series of their Tatula SV TW. And as an inshore angler, I think any opportunity you have to have increased performance or increase the length of like new performance on your products, you'll take it wherever you can get it. So they have two CRBBs included in their spool and at the side plate around their mag force brake design, which we're going to dive into a little bit later in the review. But looking at some more of the specs, the Tatula SV TW actually comes in three different speed models. They have a 6:3:1, 7:3:1, and 8:3:1 gear ratio. Their hyper speed is really fast, but the 7.3:1 I think offers a good balance of speed and power in the reel, so we decided to go with their middle option. Again, 29.5 inches per turn for pickup is fantastic for a baitcaster. That is a lot of line retrieved back. Now, it's really tough to say, it's really hard to compare apples to oranges in terms of the line pickup of a baitcaster to a spinning setup. I know some spinning reels can pick up 34, 35 inches per turn, but for a baitcaster, that is a great rate of speed for pickup. And in terms of weight, we're looking at 7.2 ounces on this Tatula and 13.2 pounds of drag. Again, apples to oranges, there's some spinning setups that can put out way more drag pressure, but just in the sheer design of a baitcaster and how line comes on and off the spool, you're going to have the most control and torque over a fish because line's going to come directly off of a spool as opposed to at a 90-degree angle on a spinning setup. So I think you're going to get the most out of this, especially when you're fishing close around structure. So the first major feature that I want to talk about on this reel is what Daiwa calls their SV concept. Now guys, if you're anything like me, I am not much of a baitcast user. And the number one reason, and I'm sure a lot of people will agree, is that baitcasters can be frustrating because of backlash. That is arguably the most frustrating thing on a baitcaster. Baitcasters perform very differently than spinning setups, but they also have a lot more variables to consider that when you dial it in just right, can be to your advantage. They have tension adjustments on the spool. They have brakes. Even the line that you use on the baitcaster, whether it's braided line or it's fluorocarbon, the weight of the braid can affect the tension on the spool when it's spinning. So I think inherently that's why a lot of guys have been apprehensive to consider baitcasters, especially the guys fishing inshore. But I will say that Daiwa's SV concept helps eliminate a lot of things and a lot of frustrations that I think any fisherman, whether it's freshwater or saltwater, doesn't matter, would have with a baitcaster as a whole. And that's what the SV concept is. SV stands for stress-free, i.e. no backlash, which we're going to show here in a video clip in a minute. And the V stands for versatile, which means that the design and the weight of the spool and how it interacts with the braking system is going to allow you to cast lighter lures a further distance and more accurately. Traditionally, baitcasters kind of struggle at throwing lures that are lighter than 1/4 of an ounce in weight, jig head with a plastic. Anything lighter than that, and a lot of guys would view spinning setups as being the prime go-to for finesse fishing applications. And while it's not perfect, I will say that this does offer an angler a little more control and a little increased casting distance and control over your lure if you decide to throw an 1/8 ounce on a jig head or an 1/8 ounce on a weighted twist lock, just a small paddle tail. You're going to have more options with this SV spool, and we're going to dive into that here as we take off this side plate, take a closer look at the mag force braking system, the magnetic braking system on this reel, and how it works in conjunction with this SV spool design. So let's dive right in and take a closer closer look at how Daiwa's SV spool inside works in conjunction with their MagForce magnetic braking system. So this dial here on the side has settings from 0 all the way to 20, and that's going to determine how much magnetic force is being applied to the spool. This little screw here on the outside, I'm just going to back that off. There's some guys that can do this with their fingernails and fingertips. I am not that savvy, so I'm going to take a little tool and pop that off. And this is spring loaded, so you're not going to lose this piece. It's not going to back out. Just twist the side plate down. Let's wiggle that off. There we go. And you get to see the inside of this reel. So let's take it piece by piece and let's see if this makes sense. So the concept of this SV spool design, guys, is what you see here, this little orange cup. This is what Daiwa calls their inductor cup or inductor rotor. And what this does is you see it kind of moves out and in, out and in. So this is actually what is working in conjunction with the magnetic system here on the side plate of this reel. These rings right here on the inside are magnets. And depending on whether, like I said, you're at 0 or 20, is going to determine how much magnetic force is going to work in conjunction with this SV spool. And what this does, the concept is, when you cast and the spool is rotating as fast as it possibly can at the top of your cast, this inductor cup is going to shoot out, okay? And when it does, it's going to work in conjunction with these magnets, and depending on how you have it set, it's going to apply more or less resistance during the cast. It's not putting resistance on the spool itself. This induct rotor is actually what is providing the resistance on the spool. Really, really cool design. As you guys are going to see here in this video, there were many casts. I'd say, let's say 9 out of 10 casts that I had that I was able to cast as hard as I could with a couple different lure styles. I started with our Slam Shady Bomber, as you're going to see here, on just an 1/8 ounce weedless weighted hook, and it's an owner twist lock. And I started by presetting my tension adjuster and my cast control, my braking system on the left-hand side of the reel, and cast as hard as I could, and I could not backlash it. I mean, it did not have a professional overrun, didn't have to use my smart thumb and slow down that spool at all. It did its job. It was pretty impressive to do. I can't say that I've had that ability with other baitcasters that I've owned fishing in freshwater scenarios. So as you can see, the SV concept really does work. It's a pretty ingenious design. In terms of providing equal pressure, magnets is definitely the way to go, as opposed to a traditional centrifugal braking system that will physically provide resistance on the spool when it spins. This is 360 degrees of resistance to slow down that spool while it's spinning. And at the end of the cast, what will happen is this inductor cup will work its way back in and further away from the brakes, so it kind of adjusts the way that this spool is spinning. And that is what ultimately prevents the backlash here on this type of spool. I want to crank this up a notch. I know that I can cast this Tatula SV TW without my thumb and not bird's nest, but I want to try to skip a lure. If I were to skip underneath a mangrove or a dock, I want to see how well this is going to perform without having my thumb on the spool. So I've got just a weedless bomber with an owner weighted twist lock. I'm going to skip this around a couple times without using my thumb on the spool to control the cast, and see if we can see if it's going to hold up and not bird's nest in that type of scenario. There's first skip, no bird's nest. Let's bring it back in. A second skip, good. Oh, good there. Had a little bit of an overrun, but surprise, that one was pretty close to me and did not blow up into a giant bird's nest. That one for sure should have bird's nest, I'm not gonna lie. That was right here, just 3 feet from me. Okay, that's pretty impressive, I'm not gonna lie. Normally, when you think about using a baitcaster and just smacking the water 5 feet in front of you, you would expect a bird's nest. And so far, I'm getting pretty consistent casts on this setting and getting, I don't know, I'd say that's 40 feet of distance skipping a soft plastic rigged weedless. So pretty cool. Another cool feature on this baitcaster is Daiwa's TWS system. And for those of you baitcast enthusiasts, you're probably already familiar with this feature. It's included in about 70% of Daiwa's Baitcasters, 150 bucks and more. This TWS or T-wing system, as they call it, let me kind of show you guys and get this centered. Essentially what it is the level wind aperture that they've redesigned and re-engineered. You see this opening here is much bigger than what is on a traditional level wind on a baitcaster. And the idea is that by having a bigger opening, when you go to cast and line is peeling off the spool, this bigger opening is going to allow for line to travel left and right off the spool without as much friction and resistance. And that's going to equate to further casting distance because the line is not fighting itself to get out of a smaller opening on, say, a traditional baitcaster. So I have a Lew's speed spool tournament. I had this for a couple years, just got 12-pound fluoro on it. It's my go-to finesse bass fishing tool when I'm throwing a wacky rig. But most traditional baitcasters have a pretty small or narrow opening in their level wind. And like I said, when you're reeling, it may line the line back on smooth and straight, but when you go to cast, there are going to be times where the line is all the way to the left or the right of the spool, and it's essentially fighting itself to work its way out through the smaller opening. So by increasing the area that the line can travel through, you're going to have less resistance and therefore an increase in your casting distance. Now, to address a couple of cons here with this particular Tatula SV TW is that even though this MagForce, this magnetic braking system matched with an SV spool offers you a lot of control and the ability to cast lighter lures a further distance, from a casting distance standpoint, this style of braking, even if you have it set all the way to 0, there's always going to be tension applied here at the spool. So you're inherently going to have a little bit of a reduction in casting distance. There's a number of casting contest videos out there showing the Tatula SV TW against a Shimano DC baitcaster and a few other different models where other reels will outperform casting distance by, let's say, 10 or 15 feet, to be fair. So if you're the type of person that just wants to go the distance and cast a big lure across an open flat and cover a lot of ground, this might have a limiting factor that you guys need to keep in mind. And additionally, when it comes to line capacity, so I was able to fit 90 yards of 30-pound braid on here. You could probably fit about 100 yards of 20-pound braid. There are other 100 to 150 size baitcast spools that will hold a lot more line. I think the Coastal SV TW holds like 200 yards of 20-pound braid. So if you think you're going to go after, let's say, a big bull redfish or potentially a big snook, and you know it's going to dump a lot of line, line capacity is going to be a little bit lower on this particular Tatula. A lot of other baitcasters hold between 150 and 180 yards of 20-pound braid. You're only looking at about 100 yards with this particular model. So the line capacity is going to be a limiting factor as well. And if any of you out there are wondering when you might want to fish with a baitcaster for inshore saltwater scenarios, I can tell you right now, anybody over there in Texas, any of you guys fishing the Gulf Coast marshes, you already know what's up. When it comes to having accurately placed casts and having control over your casts, it is pretty hard to beat a baitcaster once you dial it in and once you get it to the settings that work for you as an angler. And the same for those guys that are fishing around structure. If you're skipping up underneath mangroves and docks and you want to beef up that line to 30 or maybe even 40-pound test, and you want to accurately get that lure from A to B right where the fish is sitting, with practice, you have a lot more control and a lot more settings that you can tweak out here on a baitcaster. So it definitely is a utility reel. It has more applications for accurately presenting lures, I think, in a shorter distance than fishing out in the wide open where you're trying to power fish. I definitely think that a baitcaster shines in that type of setting. And for those guys that are going to be skipping up underneath docks here in the winter months, this reel is actually going to be Luke's, popping up in videos here, I'm sure, in the future. Great tool. I think this is a good tool to match up with a 7-foot medium heavy or a 7.6 medium heavy rod and winching fish away from structure. This is going to be a great tool to have in your arsenal. If you want to pick yourself up one of these Tatula SV TW Baitcasters, we have some available on our shop page, fishstrong.com. You guys got to head over and check it out. If you have any questions about this baitcaster, leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're new to Salt Strong, just know that we're the best online online fishing club in America that teaches you how to catch more redfish, sea trout, snook, and flounder. There's nothing else like it, guys. We literally guarantee that you're going to catch more fish while saving time and money. We do this with our premium education, an exclusive insider community, and huge discounts on all the tackle that an inshore angler needs. So to learn more, head over to saltstrong.com and we will see you on the water soon.